"Take care of your own damn business, Smokey," he yelled. But there was no anger in his voice. Terry stared at his scowling features. The very thought of him putting his large, blubbering lips on her was enough to fill her with revulsion. She stared at Smokey's departing back and wondered how the woman could possibly live with such a man. It only went to prove what they said was true. There was someone for everybody. "How far do you live from him, Minnie?" Terry asked. "I stay at the hotel across the street," Minnie answered, and started towards the door. "If Porky don't act funny and stop us from taking our stuff out, we can go over there and do up." The doorman opened the door for them, after Porky gave him a nod. Both women gave a sigh of relief as they left the shooting gallery. Terry stared at the old hotel curiously as they crossed the street. The front of it was sagging, as though it would fall over if a strong wind blew its way. The only thing that informed the passerby that it was a hotel was an old sign hanging from the dilapidated porch that read, "Transient Rooms for Rent." A sharp blast of wind almost lifted the short skirt Terry wore as they hurried across the street. She clutched her short, stylish coat around her and followed Minnie. They entered the hotel, and she glanced around. The inside was just as bad as the outside. Just past the entrance on the right was a check-in office. Actually, it was just a room, only the door was different. The top of the door opened, while the bottom part could be kept closed. Sitting behind the closed part of the door was an old woman who looked as if she were part of the building. Her face was covered with wrinkles, and her head a ball of knotted gray hair. When she leered at them, she revealed a mouth completely empty of teeth. There were 2 or 3 snags that might have once upon a time been called teeth, but now there was nothing but yellow stumps inside her mouth. She waved a withered hand at Minnie. "My, honey, you ain't working tonight, huh?" she inquired in a voice that was much stronger than the frail body it came from. "Maybe later on tonight," Minnie replied over her shoulder as she led the way up some stairs. Once upstairs, they went down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. Minnie stopped at a door without a number on it. "I use this room for my tricks," she said in answer to Terry's surprised glance. "That's about all this hotel is used for, Terry. If you got a John who ain't got too much money, you can bring him here, and the old bitch downstairs won't charge you but $1 for the use of a room." Minnie opened the door as she talked, and they went in. "The only thing really wrong with the damn place," she continued, after closing the door behind them, "is the toilets. You have to use the one at the end of the hall. Ain't none of the rooms got a private job, but you get used to it." She tossed her light summer coat on the bed. "Sometimes it pays off. If a trick pays you beforehand, and you can get out of the room with the excuse that you're going to the toilet, well, it's just too damn bad for the trick. If he's that damn dumb, he needs to be took off." Terry examined the room as though it were an alien spaceship. Her upbringing had not prepared her for such poverty. Being from a middle-class black family, she had never seen the inside of such a place as this. The neighborhood she grew up in had been an interracial one since she was a child. And since most of the people in the neighborhood kept their homes and lawns up, no one was in a hurry to move. There were no deserted homes on her block, nor any bars or pawn shops in the immediate district. Terry's flashing eyes took in the tiny face bowl with a cracked mirror over it. An ancient dresser leaned against the wall, and, as she stared in its direction, 2 roaches ran from behind it and crawled into the wall. The only light in the room was given off by a small light bulb that hung down from the ceiling on a chain. Besides the bed and small chair, there was no other furniture in the bleak-looking room. Minnie took out her small package of heroin and opened it. She shook its contents onto an album cover. With a knife she removed from her bra, she split the white powder into 2 piles, pushing the smaller of the 2 towards Terry. Terry took the smaller share without complaint. Minnie walked over to the dresser and removed a small bundle wrapped up in an old sock. When she unwrapped the bundle, a large top plus a dropper and needle fell out. She came back to the bed and pushed her pile of dope into the cooker. Her fingers shook as she removed a piece of cotton from the mattress and rolled it into a tiny ball. "How about taking that glass and filling it up with fresh water for me, Terry?" Terry got up as though she were in a dream and did what she was bid. Her mind was beginning to reel under the impact of what she had done today. She came back to the bed and set the water down in front of Minnie. She picked up the album cover with her small amount of dope on it With the end of a matchbook cover, she made a small shovel and picked up some of the dope and snorted it, all the while her eyes following Minnie with fascination. Minnie removed her shoe and started to rub her foot. She examined it closely, searching for a vein. She put water in her dropper after cooking up the heroin. She raised her foot onto the bed and stuck the needle into it. As Terry watched, she could feel herself starting to blush. She couldn't imagine herself sitting in front of another woman with her skirt up and her legs wide open. It was not because she was overly shy either. When she was in high school, it was nothing for her to undress in gym class with the rest of the girls. But this seemed vulgar and indecent. Minnie pulled the needle out and pushed it into another spot. Each time she withdrew it, a tiny stream of blood would flow from the spot she had just left. Blood began to fall into the dirty sheet, then run down to the floor. As Terry watched, her eyes became large as saucers. She stared at her new friend in horror. Cursing, Minnie snatched the needle out of her foot and began to rub her arm, searching desperately for a vein. Her eyes filled with anguish. Suddenly, she stopped and balled up her fist. She took an old stocking and tied up her hand. She made a small fist, then jabbed the needle into the back of her hand. She waited impatiently for the telltale mark of blood to back up into the dropper. When she didn't get any results, she pulled out the needle and tried another spot. In minutes, her hand was full of running blood. The blood dripped down on her bare legs and onto the bed and floor. She was becoming so frantic that she was almost in tears. She jumped up from the bed and rushed to the mirror. She ran back to the dresser and searched around until she came out with a long needle. She changed spikes on her dropper. Terry had almost forgotten the dope in her lap as she stared at Minnie in horror. Blood was everywhere, the floor, the dresser, and now the face bowl was covered with it as Minnie stood over the bowl, staring into the mirror. Her fingers ran along the side of her neck, feeling for her jugular vein. Blood ran down her upraised arm as she plunged the extra-long needle into her neck. As she watched, Terry began to fight down the desire to puke. She jumped up from her chair, knocking over the album cover with the dope on it. She clutched her mouth with her hand, desperately trying to hold back the vomit, but before she could flee the room, vomit began to bubble through her tightly gripped fingers like a boiling liquid. 4. The warm sun came through the partially open window, tossing silhouettes on the wall. The sound of an angry fly buzzing around his head yanked Teddy back from his drug-ridden sleep and brought him wide awake. At first he tried to cover his head under a sheet, but the fly continued to buzz until he sat up and stared around his room in a daze. For a brief moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The sound of his mother knocking pots around in the kitchen and his sister's 3 kids playing loudly in the front room brought him to his senses. Teddy sat up in bed and reached over for a cigarette. He blew smoke through his nose as he began to plan his day. The first thought that came to him was getting his morning blow. He relaxed as he remembered that Porky had told him last night that he had given Terry a $10 pack to take home. He smiled as he thought about Terry. She would have taken it home so that he would have something to wake up on. How faithful a square bitch could be at times. I'll have to take the bitch to a motel pretty soon and give her some dick, he thought. For a minute, he tried to remember how long it had been since he had taken his woman anywhere, let alone to a motel. Oh well, the bitch should be happy just to be in his company, he decided, tossing his legs over the side of the bed and sitting up. With his morning fix already taken care of, Teddy started to plan the rest of the day. It would be nice to have a bowel movement, he thought, since he hadn't had one in over 10 days. After calling Terry, he decided he'd go into the toilet and make himself have one, even if he had to use his sister's douchebag and give himself an enema. He shivered. The sight of that long stem, and the thought of having to put it in his own rectum, sent goose pimples up and down his spine. But the idea of staying constipated any longer was out of the question. He had to have a bowel movement, and as long as he kept shooting dope as soon as he woke up, he'd never have an ordinary one. Somebody had told him that the longer his bowels stayed locked, the more dope it would take to make him high. He cursed, picked up the phone, and dialed Terry's number. After the third ring, Terry's mother answered the phone. "Hello, Mrs. Wilson. Could I speak to Terry?" He cursed inwardly as she inquired about his health, his mother, and his sister's children. The goddamn woman would take all morning just asking about people's health. Finally, she yelled upstairs for her daughter. There was a long delay before the sound of Terry's sleepy voice came over the wire.